Alright, Diablo players, it's time. Season 8's top builds for every single class. Let's go ahead and go over it. But I also want to mention, just as a heads up, keep your expectations realistic. People do these for hundreds and thousands of runs to get that one perfect run. So, for starters, let's go over the best build. And by the way, our metric for the best build for every single class is going to be using the pit leaderboard as the source. So this is basically the highest pit push. I'm going to show you guys some gameplay in the background while I talk briefly about every single build, and this way you guys can get an idea of the gameplay here in terms of what to expect when you actually want to build these. This video, by the way, is not necessarily going to be a in-depth build guide, because then the video would take like an hour long. I'm going to briefly show you guys some gameplay, and then I'll go over real rough, fast build, but I will also link a lot of stuff down below. That way you guys can go ahead and actually check out the build in depth from whoever got, the highest pit push. Technically, the Sorc has done a 117 by Makuna, but this is the gameplay that I want to show off just because it kind of fits the gameplay a little bit better because it's a little bit longer than the short little pit clear. So for starters, this is going to be the best build right now in the game. It's cleared a 117, which is all about Lightning Spear. Again, I want to give you guys realistic expectations. To get these rank 1 pushes, even if you have the exact same pieces of gear, these can take hundreds or thousands of runs to get that one perfect run to get that very high pit clear. So again, even if your gear is absolutely amazing, it's still going to take some time with all the builds, not just like the Sorc one. But again, that way people can have realistic expectations when going into these builds. So this build, just as a heads up, will require heavy spamming on specifically your Lightning Spear. Your goal is to get that lucky overpower, and then you will get really good damage. This build in particular does require a little bit more fishing, I would say, than other builds, but nonetheless, it is currently definitely the rank 1. Now, I'll also give you guys kind of a brief build guide, so that way you guys have some sort of a reference here in terms of what's required to get some of these builds up and running. This way you can kind of see if you want to make the build. There are some builds in Diablo that require multiple mythics, and with that, some people dip out of a build. I totally get it, but again, I will have a lot of these things linked down below in case any of you guys kind of want to look more in depth with the build, obviously for Season 8 with, of course, the brand new boss powers. We are running the Beast in Ice Sleet. This is actually very, very popular. It just happens to do a lot more damage. Originally, the Evade Sorceress on the PTR back when I was uploading gameplay of Pit 100s on that. That was a really, really strong build. It has definitely been nerfed over here. But next up, this is going to be Rogue. This is actually cleared at the moment a 110. So this is the Death Trap Rogue build. And this build is all about spamming the ultimate death trap again and again. If you guys are wondering also, by the way, what would I recommend people to play, because some of these builds are going to be more difficult than others, specifically the Druid is one that I would probably not really recommend. The reason why, if you really want to min-max, it requires like a snapshot that is not easy to do. But I would say as far as the builds go, Rogue to me would be one of the easiest. You don't really have to spam all the buttons to get the build up and running. It just comes down to spamming your death trap. I would really recommend this build over here, and this build in particular is running close quarters combat. There's a few different ways to actually run this Rogue build, but your main goal with it is to activate all these other different traps to get bonuses on some sort of bonus damage, or of course in every single build with Rogue you got to run caltrops because the amount of damage that you can squeeze out of that is just simply crazy high. But for the most part, the build can revolve around spamming your stealth, and then you can go ahead and spam your death trap, giving you guaranteed bunch of benefits like specifically crit, and you can also get the vulnerability, which is quite great with that. But for the most part, I would say this is probably the easier build that I could recommend in the season, because depending on what you want to actually play over here, there's actually ones where you can actually play with no mythics. This is the build that can function, I would say, the best with no mythics, because the Sorc build is not easy to play, especially if you don't happen to have the CDR requirements for it, which is usually something that every single Sorc suffers from, is you need that high CDR. But as far as the build goes, you can definitely play this one, because I've actually built this one, and with obviously mythics, it's going to be better. but I would say that you don't really need the mythics to function. And the reason why is you can actually get cooldown reduction in several different areas, specifically the rings, that really help out the build. Obviously, Starless Skies and Air of Perdition or Harlequin can help out even further, but in order for the build to become online, you don't need these. The build does crazy amounts of DPS. But what you can also do, there's another variant of Overpower, and I'm not going to go in depth again on every single build here. But for the most part, there are going to be a lot of similarities. There's Urvars, and there's also the Sleet. You can play both of those in terms of like the boss powers here. But for the most part, the important things to mention here is there is an Overpower variant where you can mix in the Beastfall Boots with Banished Lord's Talisman, get your resources at 275, and then when you run the Preparation, you get your cooldown crazy. So even though this build technically runs off of cooldown to get your Death Trap to be able to be spammed quite frequently, there are lots of different ways that you can actually play it. I've seen pretty much majority of the key passives here. So you can play Close Quarters to get the damage versus close. You can actually play Momentum as well because you can get increased energy. More energy equals more damage for the build because you can reach that 275 to get that Overpower. But you can actually also play Exposure. So the reason why I actually really recommend Rogue also this season, not because, I'm a Rogue fan, but also because you can scale the close quarters combat and you can pretty much play every single build with this key passive because that's all you need to scale. It's just your current damage gets increased versus like your trap or a very specific sort of a skill. So I really highly recommend you guys, if you guys are wondering what is my recommendation, because I got asked this quite frequently, I would say no doubt Rogue is really great this season with the variety of what you can actually play. But enough with Rogue, let's go on to the Necromancer. So the Necromancer's in tied technically with Rogue pretty much. Rogue has a little bit faster of time, but they've both done a 110, and this is actually going to be very interesting. I'm actually quite excited about this because it is a Blood Spear build, which is something that I've always really liked. Bone Spear, it's kind of the only build that you could play Necromancer when it was Season 0. This was like the ultimate build for the Necromancer. So this build is all about using Bone Spear as your main source of damage, but there are also really cool things that you can do to group up the enemies, and then you get to get these giant like explosions. I think the build is quite fun, but it's all about Bone Spear. So if this is kind of your gameplay playstyle of, just kind of a projectile, it almost reminds me more of like multi-shot. If any of you guys are fans of like Amazon from Diablo 2 and you like to like the multi-shot, I feel like this kind of fulfills the class fantasy. I really like the Sorc build too, that is all about ice shards. Unfortunately, it is not the best build right now, but I would still say that build is similar in the playstyle in terms of like kind of how it feels to Bone Spear, but obviously Bone Spear is superior. So if you like that kind of playstyle, that's where I would say that this is similar. However, this is another build where if you want all the bonuses, you're going to have to spam on all the buttons. I would say as far as grouping goes, Death Trap just does the grouping much easier, whereas this one you got to use the Corpse Tendrils. That's kind of the same thing that's in every single Necromancer build because the group up on that pixel pull is so dang good. But this is the gameplay here. It's currently done a pit 110, and if you guys kind of want like the brief rundown of the build over here, we're using a Lord Zir's Blood Pool over here, and then we have Harbingers, Wandering Death Chest Beam, and Flesh Reapers. But as far as the build goes, we'll go over kind of again, a really brief rundown so you guys can see what is required for the build to get up and running. So over here, we've got only 2 mythics here, which is great. The reason why you don't run like a Harlequin or the Air of Perdition is because Deathless Visage is actually really good. You have your chance for Bone Spear to activate 2 times over here, and plus you can get plus to 12 the Bone Spear. And look how many ranks you can potentially get. You can see this person's got rank 32, and that isn't even the highest one because he put all the masterworking specifically into the transfer Bone Spear to get the projectile to cast twice. But you can go even further, which I think is absurd numbers. 32 ranks into a skill. This almost reminds me of like Diablo 2 when you start stacking skills. And then you have the Starless Skies to help out with resources, and then we have the sacrifice bonuses because obviously you're sacrificing all of the minions. But yeah, that is the current best Necromancer build. Now moving on to the Barbarian. The Barbarian's actually one of the most interesting things. I would have not believed you if you told me a pet Barbarian build was a thing, but no, this is the pet Barbarian build. It is all about the Ancients, and interestingly enough, you don't really use Whirlwind to do damage, but it's kind of tying to applying bleed to get extra cooldown reduction, but also activating a lucky hit chance to spawn in these ancients. That's how you get all of these pets to essentially spawn in, is that you're having a lucky hit chance to spawn an ancient. The ancient will then use the abilities, giving you the earthquakes and all the other little bonuses. The twisters give you another like multiplier, but for the most part, this is kind of one of the more interesting builds. It's another build that, like, I would say is a little bit more obscure in the game. So if you want something kind of unique, because this may not last, keep in mind sometimes they do nerf things, but this is one of the more interesting builds in the game. And it's funny because they talked about like buffing Whirlwind, but it's funny that Whirlwind still works this season, but it's actually due to proccing something else. And Barbarian's been in this state for a long time where, like, with the exception of like Hoda, I felt like as far as like the gameplay goes, Barbarians always had this like cheesy like Dust Devils or Earthquakes, not their actual core skills dealing damage. But this is a very unique one and definitely one to try out this season. This is probably my second recommendation for this season, is to check out the Pet Barbarian build. So kind of how the build works in terms of like what you're looking for. You're running the Ugly Bastard Helm, running the Rage, you get the extra cooldowns, and then Fist of Fate for more damage. But it's really that your ancients are empowered with getting the earthquakes, and then you're essentially using the lucky hit chance to actually spawn in the actual source of your damage. Which is very, very interesting. So it's when you use Leap, Upheaval, and Whirlwind, you have a chance to summon the Ancient that's going to perform the skill. And again, that's how you're essentially proccing all of those bonuses. But as far as like the build goes, again, I will include a bunch of stuff in the description, or you guys can kind of find out some of the builds. But again, the point of this video was mainly to just kind of show off the gameplay and briefly talk about each build versus an in-depth guide. And then this one over here wants me to log in. So there are two technical like 107 builds for the Druid now that we're moving on to the Druid. So the Druid right now has cleared out a 108, the Barbarian's 109. But these are all pretty similar. It's basically the Sorc is a little bit above everything, and then the Spiritborn is behind everything. But I would say the other four classes are really close in line. But as far as Druid goes, there's actually two different builds. There's like a chest beam build, and then there's also a Cataclysm build. Now the chest beam build, it's a little bit vague on like the video in terms of like what the person was using. It didn't have like its build, and also it's on another like website which requires you to like sign in or like pay for the premium. But I'm gonna use this one by Boiler. He's someone that's very good in the game, and he's someone that I've watched for a while, and he's always cooking up something with the Druid. And so this one is going to be a Cataclysm Druid build, and it's kind of similar to Season 7. I say kind of because Season 7 Druid was absolutely amazing. If you want that same playstyle of activating your ultimate and just deleting everything by walking, obviously if you're doing pit pushing, you're not going to be one-shotting everything. Now if you go into the lower tiers of content, I really think that this build is awesome. Now if you do want to do the snapshot just as a heads up to get that overpower, it is going to be very difficult. This is why I do not really recommend this for most players. It is not beginner friendly at all. But there is like, again, there's a chest beam like Stoneburst build that I kind of want to cover in a separate video, but these are technically two of like the top tier builds as far as like on the leaderboards go. Both of the Druids here, you can see they're all 107. Well, technically this one has a 108, but again, it's on like another website over here. This one is it's showing off a 107, but the video quality is potato. So I'm going to use this one as our kind of example for the background again, for the gameplay. But as far as it goes, it's similar to what you've seen before. If you have played the Cataclysm Druid, it does require some uniques. If you do not have the uniques, I need to stress this build does not function without the uniques, okay? The reason why is because it's all about your ultimate. You can't really like start off with an ultimate in terms of your build, but once you do get it up online, it does feel pretty good. Obviously, if you're showing off pit gameplay, it's not going to be super smooth one-shotting everything, you know, on the screen, but it does require, if you want to get the correct overpower, okay, it does require you to kind of time your stuff with provocation, which will guarantee the next overpower. again, that is something that a lot of people will not want to jump over as far as a hurdle. However, this build, I would say, can definitely function without mythics, because you can play plus the ranks to the skills over here in the chest piece. But Tempest Roar is pretty much always there. And it's kind of interesting that Druid got a brand new helmet. No one wants to play the new thing, and that is because the new thing requires you to get a bunch of crits before it actually becomes like up online. But again, the main source of damage, again, you're going to be putting all of the points into the Cataclysm, and then you get the extra duration, you get the Hurricane for more stats, and then you play Ursine Strength over here. But it's pretty much the same thing that we've seen before. But I'll mouse over this stuff just so you guys can get kind of an idea on maybe the aspects, or if you want to pause over here. Again, I'm kind of going over this fast because this is going to be like kind of a, again, a overview here. But we're also running the Gregor's Lightning Square. I actually think this is one of the coolest ones over here because you can consistently activate it. Yeah, we also got the chest beam over here. There is one that does play this chest beam, but again, it's like the Stone Burst, which is something that's a little bit vague. And then we next up have the Spiritborn. And you know what? It's no surprise the Quill Volley is still on top. It's very interesting to see that the Spiritborn, when it was super OP, like you could play like almost everything and it honestly would destroy the game. However, now that like they've nerfed the Spiritborn, or technically fixed some of the things, although I want to say that there still might be some weird interactions with like unyielding, but this build has remained to be one of the top tier builds in the game, and there has been a couple of small micro adjustments, but in terms of like the gameplay, this build, it does heavily require you to spam everything, but I've always felt like the Spiritborn actually felt pretty good in terms of like the way that it played with the ultimate and stuff, but it does require heavy button spamming in order for the build to kind of function, I would say, at a higher level. But one thing that is quite nice, even if you're doing like, you know, open world content, is the ability to teleport with your core skills. I think that is a huge quality of life, and essentially it's kind of gotten changed from the PTR. If you guys remember, I dropped the Spiritborn builds for the poison that was absolutely destroying the game. However, yeah, things unfortunately got kind of nerfed, so we're back to, well, technically you'd still play Quill Volley anyways, and the gameplay was pretty similar. It's just that you would then proc the poison versus now you're actually doing the damage with the actual skill. But as far as it goes, if you played Quill Volley and you enjoyed it, hey, it's still there, it's still back, and you can still basically play the exact same build that we've been playing for a while. Now, you'll see that there is Starless Skies and Shroud of False Death here, but as far as the build goes, could it function without it? I would say it's not too bad without it. You do definitely want to get the Rod of Keepuleke, but this thing got omega nerfed when they changed that multiplier. Now it's like 0.1 to 0.5. Yeah, that thing is essentially the biggest area of the nerfs in terms of the build. Also, wanted to mention really quickly with Diablo, with the Druid build, is that with the Druid build, there's a huge change to the Zan rune where it like guaranteed that crit and overpower, and that no longer works with the Druid. That's why Druid actually takes another like big L here in terms of the Cataclysm Druid. It's that it's not your next attack throughout the entire duration. It's just that your next attack will cause, and it will do it that overpower or whatever with the crit for 0.35 seconds. So basically like the next like attack or a little wave of attack. And it actually kind of works out with this build because then with the primary Spirit Hall, you get to deal that massive amount of damage that you would be able to deal again, so that's kind of cool. But this is as far as the Druid build goes. You're also running the Gregor's Lightning Square, so I really like this. It makes the build feel a lot better, especially with the leveling process. Obviously, again, when you're doing the high tier pits, it's not going to just one-shot everything, but in terms of like the way that the build starts to feel once you're entering T1, you finally get Gregor down, you're able to get that. It's quite nice. But as far as it goes, guys, yeah, those are the top tier builds for every single class, and I will be updating a bunch of my different build guides to go more in depth, but I wanted this video to be kind of like an overall video for all of the top tier builds for every single class. But let me know if there's anything that I missed out on, as we don't have an official leaderboard, so we're kind of stuck using the Helltide's website for the pit in terms of the leaderboard, and it is currently kind of our best source to find out what is the best. But let me know, guys, what you think of Season 8 so far. What class are you guys playing? Obviously, yes, I'm still playing the Rogue, but I'll be also checking out the other classes, but it's going to take some time because, honestly, Season 8 takes a lot longer to grind out than Season 7 because, well, of all the adjustments. But anyways, if you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like on it. If you're new here, hit subscribe, turn on the bell if you guys would like to see more content, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Also, I'll put in the pin a bunch of the links in case you guys want to check out the other builds. But peace out.